Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while, I've been very busy, so I haven't had time to do much videos, but today I'm going to be covering paper 2 research methods, how to answer paper 2 as best as possible with a little bit of tips here and there. This is a 1.5 hour paper and I'm taking it from the May-June exams. I have noticed that over the years the exams have become a little bit more tricky because they're testing your ability to think beyond your textbook, right? Which is a good thing because in life, your textbook is not going to help you live your life. You know, you gotta have to use your brain and think a little bit out of the box sometimes. And so these questions do a little bit of that, but don't worry, as long as you use common sense, you'll be fine, right? Common sense, which sometimes can be a bit uncommon, but let's do our best for this paper. Oftentimes students ask me, Mr. Ross, how much time should I spend on each question? Well, one of my supervisors told me this. If you see a 1 mark, that means you have 1 minute for that question. Now, sometimes questions are short and you can answer it within 10 to 20 seconds. That's great. It saves you time for the longer questions at the end. But generally speaking, 1 mark equals 1 minute, right? So just be aware of that. That's just a rule of thumb. It's not a strict rule of thumb. It's just the way that I usually advise students to do their exams. Now, here's a question. In the study by Pepperberg on parrot learning, several features of the procedure help to improve reliability. Before you even answer the question, remind yourself, what is Pepperberg's experiment about, right? So Pepperberg was testing the intelligence of a parrot named Alex, right? Whether Alex could tell the difference between what's same and what's different, right? Whether he could have the cognitive ability to differentiate between similar and different things, right? And he could, right? He could identify different kinds of colors, textures, shapes, so on and so forth. Now, notice that the question, although it comes with this beginning about Pepperberg, the question itself doesn't talk about Pepperberg. So this is one of the tricky things that students often get mixed up in. This question is not about Pepperberg, right? It's not about Pepperberg. Even though Pepperberg's up here, this question is just state what is meant by reliability. And you can see here, it's a 1 mark question, meaning they're asking you for a definition. What is your definition of reliability? You don't need to talk about Pepperberg in the first question. Don't talk about Pepperberg. Just give a definition. So let's put this down. Let me color this in a different color. Blue, right? So what is meant by reliability? Now, usually I tell my students that reliability and validity. This is where students always get mixed up. So don't make this mistake, right? What's the difference between reliability and validity? Try and remember. Think about your research methodology, right? I'll give you a link. I'll give you a hint. Validity is about whether something is accurate. I'll just put okay, I can't really spell it, but accurate. Whether something accurately measures what it's supposed to measure. For example, if you have a bullseye and you hit the middle of a bullseye with an arrow, right? That's accurate. It's like you hit the middle, right? Reliable is, let's say you have a bullseye and you hit a few arrows and the arrows are all sort of like in the middle area, right? But you hit them many times, right? Multiple times in a close area, right? Then it's reliable, right? You shoot reliably. Every time you shoot, you reliably hit the middle, right? Validity is being able to hit the dead center. That means you're getting it accurately on the right spot. So validity is about accuracy. Reliability is about consistency. Just remember that. Reliability is about consistency. Does something measure what it's supposed to measure in the same way over time? Alright? So for example, if we say it like this, you would write something like along the lines, reliability is about the consistency in a study. For example, are the measures standardized so that they measure the same thing every time? Right, so that's just an example. Now, this is a bit of a long answer. I like to give slightly longer just in case. But generally speaking, just saying reliability is about consistency in study, I think that should be good enough to get you 1 mark, right, in my opinion, because you've got the keyword here is really consistency. Obviously, please don't just write one word, consistency. That's not good enough. You see, in A levels, you need to convince the examiner that you understand what you're writing. If you just put one word, consistency, and you don't write the rest of the sentence, the examiner may not be convinced that you understand what you're talking about, right? Even though in your head you know what it is, you have to convince the examiner that you know what it is, right? So that's why I usually tell my students, write it with a little bit more depth, especially for more so for A2, but for AS, you should also start practicing this, right? And it won't take too long to write this. Reliability is about consistency in a study. For example, the measures are standardized so that they measure the same thing every time. Okay, good. Let's move on to the next one. I think that's pretty clear. Suggest how one feature of the procedure helped make this study more reliable. Now, here's where it gets interesting. It says one feature of the procedure that made what study? This study more reliable. Which study are we talking about? This study is Pepperberg, and students often make biggest careless mistake. They'll talk about a different study. They forget that it's talking about Pepperberg, maybe because it's question number B. I don't know. But always look at the question. If it's this study, ask yourself, which study? Which study? It's Pepperberg's study, right? So we're thinking about Pepperberg. Pepperberg's about the parrot, Alex the parrot. Hey, Alex the parrot, what's same, what's different? What's same, what's different? What's same, what's different, right? So we want something about the procedure. Now remember, part of the procedure, they were training Alex using the model rival approach, using what's same, what's different. You want to get a refresher on what Alex the Parrot study is about? Go back to my channel, right? You guys love my channel a lot. Well, where's Alex the Parrot? Somewhere here. There's a picture of... there we go, a picture of me and my bird there. Pepperberg, right? So go and watch it, right? It's 45 minutes, not that long. Wow, 3.8 thousand views, that's a lot. So watch it again, refresh your memory. What was about the procedure that was reliable? So remember, reliable, we're talking about things that are standardized, that measure at the same time, measure the same thing in the same way, right? You want it to be consistent. So let's formulate an answer together. So firstly, one feature of the procedure, right? So when we're asking ourselves, what was in the procedure, right? What was in the procedure that was reliable? What did Pepperberg do in the procedure that was consistent, right? What did they do? Well, you could come up with a variety of different things. Like, for example, the model rival approach, right? The training that was done for Alex was kept consistent, right? What else was consistent, right? What else was consistent? You could say things like the questions asked to Alex were consistent as well, right? What were the questions? What's same, what's different? Okay, so let's use that as an answer. Although you could use other answers as well. That's not the only answer. So remember, this is a 2-mark question. So I should see, first you identify the feature, and the second mark comes from how you link it to the study, right? So for example, you could say that in Pepperberg's study, they used standardized questions to test Alex the parrot. How should we say? In order to make the study more reliable. So this is just a 1 mark of the answer. I identified the feature which is using standardized questions. Now I want to link it to the study. I would say the questions used were what's same and what's different. Right? So these are the 2 questions that link it to the study. If you don't link it, you're not going to get the 2nd mark. So identify, link. Identify, link. 2 marks. 1 mark here, 1 mark here. Easy, right? If you want to talk about the model rival approach, then you could say one of the features was that the model rival approach was used in the same way to train Alex to learn new words. And then you can explain a little bit about the model rival approach. For example, a trainer and another participant would act as the teacher and the model. A teacher and student, observer. No, like a teacher and I think what's the word I'm looking for? Teacher and student. I have to refresh my own memory. But basically, the model rival approach would be like one person would be modeling in front of Alex, and then Alex would see that person as a rival because they always get a reward whenever they answer a question right. So as long as you can explain that something is being done consistently every single time, whether it's something to do with the procedure, right? Could be the model rival, could be the questions, whatever it is, anything in the procedure, right? There are many things in the procedure, in fact, things like making sure the objects are in Alex's room to allow him to familiarize himself with them. Things like the experimenter always having her back turned to Alex while he was in the room so that he wouldn't be able to interpret her facial cues. Things like that help make the study more reliable because they are standardized. They're kept in the same way every single time. All right, let's move on to the next part. In the study by Andrade, so we've moved to a different study, Andrade Doodling. What is Andrade Doodling all about? Go and check it out. Where's my doodling study? Here, Andrade Doodling study. Okay, so refresh your memory. What was doodling? What were they doing? Right, they were listening to a tape recording with a bunch of names of people going to a party, and they were asked to recall, hey, do you remember the names going to the party? And do you also remember the places? Right, so there was a surprise there. Now, one possible uncontrolled variable was whether participants had friends with the same names as people in the mock telephone call. Right? So they're listening to a telephone recording, a mock telephone recording, and what if I hear a name of someone in the recording who's also one of my best friends, right? So one of my best friends, for example, his name is Han, right? H-A-N, Han. What if in the telephone recording, I also heard the name of someone named Han, right? Now, what might be the problem? What might be the problem that this causes? It's a 2-mark question, so I need to give a problem, plus I need to sort of like give some detail, right, to explain it and link it to the study. For example, let's try this. First, we identify one problem. So what could the problem be? The problem could be something as simple as it could lower the validity of the study. Now, that's 1 mark if you can identify a problem. The second mark comes from explaining why is this a problem, right? Why does it lower the validity, right? Because, lowers the validity because if someone hears their friend's name, they may be more likely to recall it later. Therefore, the IV is being affected by the IV is being affected. Therefore, this would confound the results and reduce validity. Okay, so what's the problem? If you have a friend's name that you hear inside the tape recording, and let's say it's a really good friend, you might end up memorizing that friend's name or recalling it better compared to all the other names. And that's not what we want in the study, right? That's not the purpose of the study, is not to test whether you can remember your friends' names, right? The purpose of the study is to test whether or not when you are doodling, does that help you remember, does that increase your memory, right? So this is the problem, right? You identify the problem that it could lower validity. And why does it lower validity? Well, because it could confound the results. By hearing your friend's name, you're more likely to recall it later, right? So that's how you get the 2 marks. Identify, explain. Next one, suggest how the problem you referred to could be solved. Again, it's 2 marks. So you have to give some level of detail. 1, you give a solution and explain that solution with a bit more detail in order to get the full marks. Okay, so let's think of a possible solution. You want to do a study, you're going to mention some names of people, but you don't want anyone to have friends' names in that telephone call. So what do you think is the most easy way to do it? Right? Think about it. You want to somehow make sure that the names that you use and the names that people are friends of are not the same. Right? So for example, you might say, before the study, the experimenter can ask participants, what can you ask them? To list out the names of all their friends they can remember. Right? So, before the study, I ask you, tell me, the list of all your friends. I'll give you 5 minutes. And you just write. Right? And then, the telephone call should then use names which do not overlap with the names of friends from the participants in order to increase validity, in order to avoid confounding the results. Alright, so what have I said here? Firstly, before the study, the experimenter can ask participants to list out the names of all their friends, right? Pretty straightforward. Hey, before you join the study, can you tell me who your friends are? Why do we do that? Because we want to make sure that the names do not overlap, right, with the ones used in the telephone call. So can you see 2 marks, 1 mark, 2 marks. You list out what you think a good suggestion would be and how does it solve the problem, right? So again, you're using common sense here. You want to get 2 marks, make sure you give some level of detail. This alone is not enough because this is just like half the answer. You're not telling me how this solves the problem, right? This is just the solution. It solves the problem by removing the overlapping names. So you can see that. There are other things that you can possibly consider. Let's say, for example, instead of names of people, maybe you could use names of objects instead, right? Recall the list of objects being brought to the party: cheese, a tablecloth, a knife, butter, stuff like that, right? So that way you don't have the same problem of the friends' names because now you're just asking people to recall objects from the telephone call. So there are a variety of different answers, right? This is an open question in the sense that you have to use your creativity, right? Use the creative juices in your brain to think about something where you can solve the problem, right? You need to have a problem-solving mindset, right? Let's move on to the next question. State what is meant by a case study. So this is all to do with research methodology knowledge, right? There's case studies, we've got experiments, we've got interviews, focus groups, and a lot of different ways of conducting a psychological study. Now, we have seen case studies before. Do you remember one of the case studies that we've looked at? Right? Who can remember? Try and think about it, right? Some of them include, why can't I turn this? Move. So what were some of the case studies we had? Remember the parrot? Yeah. Pepperberg's study is a case study. What else? Remember a boy who was afraid of buttons, right? Savidra and Silverman were also case studies, right? Why were they case studies? Because they used 5 people, 6 people. No, because they used 1 person. So tada, thinking about it gives you the first answer, right? A case study is a type of study that focuses on one individual, right? Right? Now, wait a minute. It's a 2-mark question. Is this 1 sentence enough? Not enough. This just gives me 1 mark. I need a 2nd mark. What should I do? I should describe it a little bit more in detail, right? Do I talk about Pepperberg and Savidra here? Do I? No, I don't need to because the question doesn't ask me to. The question just says, state what is meant by a case study. This is a definition kind of question. So if I know that a study focuses on one individual, what else does a case study involve, right? A case study is also involves a more in-depth approach to gathering data about an individual, such as a combination of both qualitative and quantitative data. Maybe I go through scales. Qualitative, I might put interviews. Alright, so this is a bit of a long answer, but better be safe than sorry. My brain kind of thinks in A2 terms, so this is kind of like an A2 level answer. For AS, as long as you explain it and you give a reason for it, you get the 2 marks, right? First mark is what is a case study, it focuses on one individual. The second mark is it goes into much more depth compared to other studies, right? Experimental studies are usually just quantitative, right? Questionnaires, quantitative, but a case study is very much in-depth, very detailed, a lot of different sources of data, qualitative and quantitative. As we saw, for example, in Savidra and Silverman's study, there were scales that were used, right, to measure the boy's anxiety. And there were also interviews to figure out, what's going on with the boy, his background, his story, and stuff like that. Okay, so that's how you get 2 marks. Let's move on. One type of color blindness is when people cannot tell the difference between colors red and green. Describe how a case study to investigate how color blindness could be conducted. So this question, I don't know. In my opinion, this is more of a question more of biology, right? Because color blindness isn't really a psychological phenomenon. It's more of a biological problem, right? So I don't really like this question, but such is life. We don't get to choose. Now, how many marks is this question? Can you see? 3 marks. 3 marks means I need 3 distinct points, right? In order to get my 3 marks. So what could those distinct points be, right? So firstly, what's the question asking us to do? Describe, so you have to give some details, how a case study to investigate color blindness could be conducted. So if you had to do a case study involving one person, right? We're focusing on one person to investigate color blindness. And remember, we talked up here, we've got qualitative data and quantitative data, right? So how could we do it? We could first, for example, we might say, let's think. How could we first conduct the study? Okay, firstly, to conduct the study, we probably need to find someone who's colorblind, right? So, study could be conducted using voluntary sampling by posting an ad for color blind participant at a eye hospital, right? So something like that. That's how we would conduct it, by first finding our participant, right? Then what comes next? What comes next? Now that we've got our participants, we need to figure out what we're going to collect, what kind of data. Well, qualitative data firstly, right? So let's think of maybe an interview question, right? Next, qualitative data could be obtained by interviewing the colorblind participant about their life experiences being colorblind and how it feels. Something along those lines, right? So you want to show the examiner that you get it. One person, and you're doing some in-depth interviewing. And then lastly, maybe you could say, so we're talking about color. Color. What kind of scales can we talk about in terms of color? Next, the experimenter could not necessarily experimenter, the researcher could present the colorblind participant with a list of colorful objects and measure how accurate they are in identifying each object's color. Something like that, right? Something along those lines. Basically, you want to show the examiner that firstly, you understand how to conduct a case study. You find one participant, do some qualitative, do some quantitative, case study, right? And you get 3 marks. Quite nicely over there. Okay, something along these lines. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but something to show the examiner that you understand that case studies usually involve in-depth data, either usually quantitative and qualitative combined together, right? So that will be a good way to get your 3 marks. This up a bit. All right. Okay, so that's that. Again, 1 mark is for 1 distinct point. 3 marks, 3 distinct points. What do I mean by distinct points? Each point should be unique from the other point. It shouldn't all sound the same, right? Okay, let's move on. In the study by Yamamoto et al., Chimpanzee Helping, quantitative data was collected. So now focusing on quantitative data, suggests one strength of collecting quantitative data in this study. Okay, so it's not just a strength on its own, it's a strength in this study. So you need to link it. gave 1 point to explain the strength and 1 point to link. This is where students really miss out their points. They always forget to link. Link with a capital L. And you see the 2 marks there, you know you have to link it to the study. So let's think about the study, right? Remember chimpanzees helping behavior, right? So chimps and helping behavior, right? How did they measure helping behavior? You guys remember, right? The number of times chimps offered the correct tool, right? And there were 2 conditions, right? The can see and cannot see, right? Can see versus cannot see, right? So there was a wall blocking the 2 chimps, and if you can see what the other chimp is going through, you're more likely to offer the correct tool. If you cannot see, you're more likely to offer the wrong tool. So we want to know the strength of collecting quantitative data. In this case, it's just the number of times, right? So it's a number. It's what are the strengths of measuring in terms of numbers? What's the strength? Starts with a capital letter O, right? So quantitative data is strength. Strength because it provides an objective measurement of the data. Right? Quantitative data is strength. Where's my spelling off today? Probably because I'm tired. I just came back from work and it's like 12:34 a.m. So I'm pretty tired. Quantitative data is a strength because it provides an objective measurement of the data. Okay, so good. You've identified the strength, right? Quantitative data is objective. Great, but that's only worth 1 point. Why is objective good, right? Why does it matter that objective is good, particularly in terms of this study, right? So again, we want to talk about this study in context. We could say that because measuring helping behavior was objective, hence there is less measurement, less researcher bias when it comes to interpreting the results, making the study more valid. Okay, right, so let's read this together. Because measuring helping behavior was objective, hence there is less researcher bias when it comes to interpreting the results, right? Making the study more valid, right? That's the whole point of measuring stuff in numbers. Numbers speak for themselves. Numbers do not lie, right? So you can measure numbers all day long. You don't have to worry because it will not be affected by your interpretation, right? A number is a number. So, and because you're not, the interpretation cannot play a role, therefore your study is far more accurate. In this case, we use the word valid. Okay, so that's how you get your 2 marks. Again, identify, explain, identify and link. And again, it says this study. So you have to, So, okay, this is actually not a good answer because I didn't link it. This answer is very generic. Okay, so that's good. This is exactly the mistake students make, I just made. Because measuring helping behavior was objective, hence there is no researcher bias, blah, blah. Where's the chimps? I don't see the chimpanzees. Because measuring chimpanzee helping behavior by the number of correct items given. Okay, so that links it clearly to the study. Just now I was too vague. Now I know that, definitely it's about chimpanzee helping. This study, the examiner can see that, yes, you have linked it to the study. Great. Let's move on. Explain one weakness of random sampling. So again, paper 2 is going to test you a lot on your research methodology knowledge. I don't have any videos on research methodology because I'm afraid I just don't have the time to record it. It will take too long to prepare slides and record it. So yeah, I mean, you just have to make do with the notes from your own lecturers. But generally speaking, research methodology is pretty straightforward logic. Okay. Now, random sampling. What is random sampling? If you can remember, what is random sampling? Random sampling, for example, is when you take the names of all the people in a population, right? So names of all people in a particular population, and you randomly choose. Yeah. Right? So it can be putting paper in a hat, using a random number generator, right? Right? And there are many ways to do it, right? It could be as simple as, you could just literally open one and like random number generator or random number picker or whatever it is, right? Ta-da, just random number generator. So it's random, right? More random numbers. Yeah, so ta-da, random numbers. So if you use random numbers, that's random sampling to choose people. So let's say you give everybody a number from 1 to 1,000, then you randomly choose them accordingly. But what's the weakness? And it's asking you to explain the weakness, and it's a 2 marks. So you should identify one weakness and give an accompanying description, detail, some kind of explanation to make the answer more comprehensive. Okay, so firstly, random sampling happens in a particular population of people, right? And so the problem with that is you are, right, random sampling is limited to the population being sampled from. So for example, you might say that, I want to sample university students. So you go to the university, you get all the students' names, you use a random number generator to pick out those students, and that's random and it's good, but the problem is it's still limited to that population of students, right? So for example, even though, randomly sampling a group of students from one school may not be representative of all schools in the world. Okay. Yeah. So again, you must remember that just because it's randomly sampled, which is good, right? Which is randomly sampled is one of the best ways to sample, but it may not be representative of others, right? If you're just sampling from one particular population, right? The population is limited, and therefore your sample is also limited. It's not as representative as it should be. If you want a more representative sample, you have to sample between different schools. Schools which have higher education, schools with low education, schools which are rich, schools which are poor, and so on and so forth. Right? So it's a lot more complicated. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to identify what the problem is, and then explain it and give some kind of explanation. All right. So, what else can you talk about in terms of this? I guess you could also say that when you randomly sample people, sometimes they don't sign up, right? Just because you randomly sample them doesn't mean that they're going to come for your experiment, right? You might randomly sample them, you want them in your study, but they couldn't be bothered. They're not interested, right? So that could be another weakness. Okay, describe structured observations and unstructured observations using any examples. Okay, so firstly, let's break down the question. Structured, unstructured observations. Okay, good. So we're looking at behavior, right? Observation is always when you're looking, right, at some kind of behavior, right? And structured and unstructured, you just have to, remember it from your research methodology. However, generally speaking, the names kind of give it away, right? So structured, the word suggests that you have to have some kind of format, right, involved when you're observing. And unstructured suggests that there is no specific format. You just observe everything, right? At the same time, you have to give examples. Now, it says any examples. When I see the word any examples, I know what it means is that you can use any example in the world of psychology that's relevant. However, I always tell my class, just because it puts the word any, please don't go and use just any random example. You might get it wrong. It's always best to use examples from the studies in your syllabus. If you can't think of any, then take something out from memory, but try to always use the studies in our syllabus. Okay, so it's a 6-mark question, right? 6 marks. We need to find at least, if you can, well, I don't know whether you need 6 specifically distinct points, but that would be good, right? So first things first, when you have a described question, you want to define, right, what is a structured and unstructured observation, right? So first we have to define, then we explain, and then we give an example. So these are the 3 points that you need from each. First, define what is structured, explain it with a bit more depth, and then give an example that's linked. And then you get 3 points for structured, 3 points for unstructured. So let's try this together. Firstly, what is a definition for structured? So structured observations are when researchers or experimenters have a checklist of behaviors that they are specifically looking out for in the participants. Okay, something along those lines, right? Something along those lines. Basically, when you're structured observation, you have a checklist. You know what you want to find. Okay, so that's point number 1, right? We got our first point. Next, we have to explain. So let's explain. Think how can we elaborate on this? So you might say things like having a behavioral checklist is good because what? Why is it good to have a checklist, right? Because it increases the reliability among observers because everyone is looking for the same set of behaviors. Right? So everybody's doing it. It's kept consistent across all observers, so it can increase the reliability. Okay, so I've identified, defined it, given a little bit more of a depth and explanation towards it, right? And now I want to give you an example. So can you think of an example of a structured observation? Remember one from our studies? Think about it, think about it. So there are a lot of observations in our studies, right? Especially when it comes to observing people. Tilyavin, right? On the train, what did they observe? What about structured observations? Let's think. Shakhtar and Singer. I could be spelling that wrong. Right? What did they observe? Was it structured? Did they have things that they were looking out for? Right? What about Bandura? Did Bandura have things that he was looking out for? Right? When they were doing the study? So ask yourself these questions and come up with an appropriate one. I think Bandura is the easiest, I think, because it's pretty clear. If you remember from Bandura's study. So for example, in Bandura's study, the observers counted how many times children showed aggression towards the Bobo doll by hitting it with a mallet. Right, so a very specific behavior, and observers are counting the number of times it happens. Right, so define, explain a little bit, give an example. Ta-da, 3 marks, just like that. Halfway through. What's the second part? Unstructured. So following our same thing, define, explain, example. Unstructured observations are when researchers do not have a specific checklist of behaviors. Instead, they observe all behaviors that occur. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of unstructured, is that you don't have a specific list of them. You kind of just want to observe everything, right? Okay, so let's think of something that we can use to extend the answer a little bit further, right? Why is it good to observe all behaviors? Let's think of an answer. Is it good? Is it good? Yes, it is good. So one of the things that you could say is that by doing an unstructured observation, you identify everything, and then it helps researchers narrow down certain categories of behavior by first observing all possible behaviors that could occur. Right? So if you don't know what categories to make, you need to do an observation, and from there you can make the categories more accurately. Right? So let's think of an example that used unstructured observation. Right? So we looked at Bandura, for example. We looked at, let's see what else. We also looked at, okay, so let's take Bandura's example, right? For example, in Bandura's study, the children would say things that, let me think, how can we give a good example? In Bandura's study, the researcher did not have a specific word to record from the children's talking, but instead just recorded the comments they made. And let's see, and we just go as qualitative data. Okay, so unstructured is usually quantitative data. It's very objective because you have a checklist. Sorry, structured. Unstructured is when researchers don't have a specific checklist, but it helps researchers to narrow down certain categories of behavior. For example, in Bandura's study, researchers did not have a specific word to record from the children talking, but instead just recorded the comments they made as qualitative data. Right? So that was unstructured. It was not as if they were looking for how many times does a child say ow, or bang, push. Right? They don't do that. They just recorded whatever was said. The children said things like, my daddy's strong, or he's as strong as my daddy, or punch him, sock him, and stuff like that. That was not specific. It was just general stuff that they said. Okay. Moving on. Section B. Right. Kira is conducting a correlation study looking for a relationship between level of creativity and the amount of time spent playing a sport. Okay, Kira could find a positive or negative correlation. So again, always read this and understand what is going on, right? So firstly, correlational study. So there are two variables at least. I should see variable 1, variable 2. Relationship between level of creativity. Okay, so variable 1 is creativity, and variable 2 is amount of times playing a sport, right? Variable 1, variable 2, right? Creativity, playing sport. Creativity, playing sport. Are they correlated to each other? Is there a relationship? Now, it also says Kira could find a positive or negative correlation. So we're not sure what she's going to find. She could find either one, right? Either one. State whether Kira should use a directional or non-directional hypothesis. Include a reason for your answer. Okay, this is one of the rare times where for a 1-mark question, they ask for a reason, unfortunately. Usually for a 1-mark question, you just need to state the answer. But in this case, they purposely ask for a reason, so make sure you give one. Even though it's only 1 mark, in my opinion, it should be 2 because you're giving the reason. So what do we want to say? Firstly, directional or non-directional? What do you think? She doesn't know whether it's going to be positive or negative. She has no idea. When you don't know which direction, you should use a, right? So Kira should use a non-directional hypothesis. Now the question is, why? We have to give a reason, right? Reason being because she doesn't know whether the results would be positive or negative. Okay, so because she doesn't know whether she's going to find positive or negative correlation, therefore she should use a non-directional hypothesis, right? Because you don't know. So it's better to just say you don't know which direction it's going to go. State what Kira would find if there was a negative correlation. Okay, so correlation, again, two things having a relationship. There's positive and there's negative, right? What does negative and positive refer to? It's about direction. If it's a positive correlation, A goes up, B goes up. A goes down, B goes down. So what does it mean? Positive means same direction. Same direction. I just put same D. Negative correlation in this case is one goes up, the other goes down. Or this one goes down, the other goes up. So you can reverse, right? So that's what negative correlation refers to. So state what would Kira find? What would she find if there was a negative correlation? So we don't know if there's a negative correlation yet, but what if it was? What would we say? What would the findings be? Right? It would say something along like the findings would show that as level of creativity increases, right? Remember negative, the level of time spent playing a sport, right? So if this is increases for creativity, this one should be decreases. So the findings would show that as level of creativity increases, the level of time playing a sport decreases, right? So again, one up, one down. That's what negative correlation means. Now, it's asking you to write a null hypothesis. What does null hypothesis mean? Null hypothesis is basically saying that there will be no correlationship. There's no effect. That's why the word null, like zero. It's like telling you that there's nothing. And we always test using the null hypothesis, right? So the null hypothesis would be something along the lines of there is no correlation between level of creativity and time spent playing a sport. Okay, that's it. Very simple, right? What is a null hypothesis? There's no correlation between level of creativity and time spent playing sport. This applies for everything. Null hypothesis for any study, it's always just saying that there's no correlation, no relationship, nothing happened, right? That's what we want to see in a null hypothesis, because we don't know whether it's going to go left, we don't know whether it's going to go right, we don't know the direction, so it's better to be safe by just saying a null hypothesis. We don't know which correlation it will be. Okay. Now let's assume Kira finds a strong correlation. Right? It doesn't say negative or positive, it just says finds a strong correlation. What does that mean? That means when one moves up, the other one also moves up quite fast. If one moves down, the other one also moves down. Explain whether Kira will know if one variable is causing the change in another variable. Okay, so this is a bit of a tricky question that requires common sense. Why? Explain whether Kira will know if one variable is causing the change in the other variable, right? So I've got my creativity here that's going up and my sports playing is going down, right? But what could a possible variable be in between that's influencing my results? Why? Because correlation is not causation. You cannot say that this causes this to happen. No, it doesn't always work like that for people. Right, so that's causation. What we want is correlation. Okay, so next question. Okay, so if we find a strong correlation, does that mean that we can conclude that one variable is causing the change in another? The answer is no, because correlation is not causation. Right, so that's pretty much the answer, but it's a 2-mark question, so we need to give a bit more detail. Okay. So what could a third variable be that's causing the change in creativity and sport? So I might say there could be a confounding third variable that, what could we say? Such as age, that could affect both level of creativity and time spent playing sport. Okay, so how can I make this a bit better? I'm not very happy with the answer. Let me think. Okay, I might add something like e.g. Older people tend to be hard, tend to be less open. Let's think. Older people might experience memory loss, and hence their creativity is reduced. Let's see, what else can we say? Trying to think of an answer. My brain's a bit tired. Age could be a variable that causes creativity to increase, but at the same time reducing time playing sport, because as older people okay, so here for example, age could be so firstly, will Kira know that one variable is causing the other? No, no way, because correlation is not causation. In order to establish causation, you need to do a laboratory experiment and remove all other variables, keep them constant, and then you can tell whether or not, one variable is causing another one to change. Age could be a variable that causes creativity to decrease, but at the same time reducing physical time playing a sport, as older people may find it harder to play. Something along those lines, you just want 2 marks, right? So 1 mark is identifying, right? The answer, no, correlation or causation. 2 marks is sort of like describing, a situation where this comes into play, right? What could be a third variable, right? So age is one of them. What else could it be? Education, maybe. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. How many questions do we have? Oh, I've got a lot of questions. Okay, let's go through quickly as I'm falling asleep in front of my computer. Ruth is planning an interview to investigate the emotional effect of being a wedding guest, right? So, suggest one open question that Ruth could ask about the emotional effect of being a wedding guest. Open question. Open. That's the key word here, right? What does open mean? Open means that you should ask a question that requires people to answer with a lot of words, right? Usually the easiest way to do this is just to put the word describe in front. Describe, what are we testing? Emotional effect of being a wedding guest, right? So describe how you felt emotionally at your last wedding dinner as a guest, right? So this is open-ended, right? Because it's asking them to describe, right? A lot of students make the mistake that they ask yes or no questions. Like things like ask them whether they enjoyed the talk. That's a yes or no, right? It's a closed question. You want open, use words like describe, or why do you feel it happened this way? How can you do things like that, right? So describe how you felt emotionally at your last wedding dinner as a guest, right? So pretty easy, open question. Now suggest one closed question. Closed question. Now remember, closed question involves something. What does it involve? It involves limiting responses, right? But you must give the responses, right? People always make the careless mistake of not giving the responses. For example, you might say, do you feel happy attending events as a wedding guest? Okay, and then answers can be yes, no, right? So you must always provide, if it's a closed question, always provide the answer. You can do false, true, yes, no. You can even give 3 or 4 answers. For example, how do you feel today? Excited, nervous, happy, angry, surprised. Just make sure that the answers options are always there. You must have the options there, otherwise it's not a proper closed question. Okay, it's only 1 mark, so that's basically it, enough. Explain how Ruth could ensure her procedure is ethical. Okay, so we're talking about ethics here. Ethics in what procedure, right? She wants to observe wedding guests and figure out their emotional, emotional effect, right? So, how can we make a procedure ethical? What are the things? What is the first thing that we should think about when we're doing ethics, right? It's called informed consent. First thing, without informed consent, we have nothing. We need to obtain informed consent that is signed by our ethics review board. Otherwise, it's considered unethical study in any part of the world, right? So informed consent. How can we write a 3-mark answer using the key point of informed consent? Okay, so again, 3 marks means I should see 3 distinct points. So let's try and get point number 1, right? So let's say things like Ruth could utilize informed consent before participants before the study, right? So that's one way to start the answer, 1 mark, right? Secondly, to get the 2nd mark, what shall I say? The informed consent forms would, what do they do? What does informed consent involve? Explaining the procedure so that people know what they're getting involved in, right? Would explain the procedure so the participants are fully aware, right? You want them to be fully aware so that it's ethical for them to take part, right? And So firstly, first mark, you can utilize informed consent. Secondly, you want the participants to be fully aware of what they're doing, right? So informed consent is good. And then third mark, what can you say about informed consent? We could also say, let's think, okay, because people are informed, they can thus make a decision whether to participate in the study or not. Right, so that's the whole purpose of informed consent, is that you want to tell people, hey, this is my study, this is what I'm doing, do you agree to participate? And the answer is usually almost always yes. Some people might disagree depending on the study, but generally speaking, you ensure ethics by utilizing informed consent. What do the consent forms do, and why is it important, so that people can make a informed decision, right? So then 3 distinct points, 3 marks, easy, right? Move on. Question number 9. Jaber is investigating the social lives of old people, and he's using a questionnaire to measure their friendships. Okay, before that, what's a questionnaire? What's the definition of questionnaire? A questionnaire is the opposite of interview. Interview is video, face-to-face, right? A questionnaire is write down questions on a piece of paper and then give it to someone, right? So questionnaire is always written questions. Interview is always verbal questions. So Jaber will use volunteer sampling, but also wants to make sure his sample is representative of old people, right? So he wants to do a study about the lives of old people. How fun, Jaber, right? So he identified 3 features of old people that are relevant to the study: whether they live alone, whether they belong to a group, the exact age. Okay, so this is a question that I've never really come across in A-levels before. It's a sort of like a funny format. It isn't really testing you on A-levels knowledge. It's, in my opinion, testing a little bit more on things like just common sense, right? Common sense. Why, using your common sense, are these 3 factors relevant to Jaber's study? Why does it matter? If you want to do a study about old people, why does it matter whether they live alone or not? If you want to do a study about old people, why does it matter whether they live in a group or in a club or society? If I want to study old people, why does it matter their exact age? And so basically we're giving the whys here, right? The why each of these features is relevant. So for example, whether they live alone or not, right? So some older people may be living in old folks' homes, and others may be just living with their parents or on their own. This would significantly affect their friendship network. Right? So just think about this. When you live alone, you're probably going to be lonely, right? It's one big problem. And you don't get to, talk to other people as often as you might want to. So it could be relevant because some people live alone, some people live in old folks' homes, and that could affect their social life scores. And you want to kind of like avoid too much of a difference. Otherwise, it's, I'm rambling on a little bit because I'm tired. But essentially, what you want to figure out is what is it about living alone or not alone could affect the study, right? Let's go to the next one. Whether they belong to a group or club, right? So some old folks, older people, belong to social groups, right? For example, sports societies, religious societies. So some older people belong to social groups, sports societies, and others don't. Others do not. This may significantly affect the results on the study. Friendships. Okay, so there's no point comparing between someone who stays alone versus someone who stays or regularly participates in sports and other activities, right? I know definitely affects the level of friendships that you have. Last but not the least, okay, the exact age. What does age have to do with any of this? Why is age important? So think about it. Whenever you get stumped by a question like this, you have to really use your common sense and think, right? When it comes to old age, old age, what happens to people when they reach a certain age? They die, right? So participants in old age may not cognitively as smart, may be a bit slower, compared to others, right? So and therefore have difficulty answering accurately. Something along those lines, right? Participants in old age may be a bit mentally slow compared to others, therefore have difficulty answering questions. Okay, so as long as you get 3 which have a bit of common sense behind them, you should be able to get the 3 marks just fine. Describe how Jabe could use a volunteer. So again, just to recap, this required a little bit of creativity. You'll see 1 or 2 questions like this popping up from time to time. It's not in the older papers, it's only in the newer papers. So be prepared to think out of the box a little bit, right? Out of the box, but still logical within reasonable means, right, to answer questions like this. Okay, moving on. Describe how Jabe could use volunteer sampling to obtain a sample. So again, volunteer sampling, what's involved in volunteer sampling? It usually has to do with posting ads, right? Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? Posting ads. So how can Jabe use volunteer sampling, posting of ads to obtain a sample, right? Basically asking you to describe the procedure of getting a sample. Now, usually people just borrow from Brian Cohen, right? Javier could put up an ad in the university campus to recruit uni students for a study. Reward. Okay, so firstly, Javier could put an ad in the university campus to recruit uni students for a study. Okay, good. What's the problem? 3 marks. Where does the other 2 marks come from? Okay, so let me think. Okay, made a mistake. The question about social lives of old people. Because I'm tired, I want to put uni students. Wrong. Firstly, Jaber could use voluntary sampling by posting ads for recruiting participants in old folks' homes. Right, so 1 mark there. Placing ads in old folks' homes. Are more likely to be seen by the target sample. What's the third thing that I can add? Can't think of one more point. Let's think. Lives of old people using a questionnaire. Can't think of a third distinct points. Okay, no, I know what you can do. Jabir could use volunteer sampling by creating ads to invite people, older people, to his study. Right, that's one point. Second point would be Jabir could post these ads to places with higher amounts of older people, such as old folks homes. Right? Placing ads in old folks' homes are more likely to be seen by the target sample. So 1, 2, 3. Right? So 3 marks. Clear points. Right? First one is creating ads. Right? Second one is where do I put the ads? Third one is what effect the ads will have. More likely to get the sample that I'm looking for. Right? Next one. Outline one reason why Jabir may exclude some old people from his sample. So you have old people, you want to study old people, but why might some be excluded? What happens to old people when they are old? Can they read as clearly? Can they operate as easily as they used to? Can they run? Right, so that might be some of the problems when it comes to this. For example, a lot of old people have memory loss, right? So for example, you could say, older people usually have memory loss, and therefore if we go hiking, you may, my brain is short-circuiting a little bit. Okay, therefore they may not be able to recall the people in their social network, the names of people. So what am I saying? One reason why Jabir may exclude some of the old people is simply because older people usually have a memory loss, right? Some kind of memory loss. Therefore, maybe not be able to recall the names of people in the social network. Okay, so that could be a problem, and because of that problem, right, you might want to exclude older people who are really, really, really old and making mistakes, right? You don't want them to be part of the study because they probably will mess up the results. Okay, next one. Suggest how Jabir could define the variable of friendship. So this is an operational definition we're looking for. Something that is clear, precise, concise, can measure. That's what we always want from operational definition, right? So how can we measure something objectively, or objectively as possible, right? Objectively, right? So we have to have some kind of a system for operational definitions, right? Usually it comes with some kind of measurement. So for example, friendship can be operationally defined as when someone talks to their friend for more than 1 hour per week. Okay, so if you talk to someone more than 1 hour per week, congratulations, you get the badge of friendship. Again, this definition is completely up to you. I usually always tell my students, put some kind of numerical calculation value inside to make it more precise. Don't just say friendship can be how much you talk to other people, right? That's a bit vague. You want an operational definition, you want it to be specific. This is how you should write. You should always give some kind of specific detail, like the amount of hours, or what else can you talk about? Yeah, that's my favorite way of looking at it. Okay. Next, Jabir intends to collect all of his data in 2 days. So that's one reason why this may reduce the validity of his findings. So again, the issue here is 2 days. What does measuring data in 2 days have with the findings of this study, right? How does measuring data quickly over 2 days affect findings? So for example, you might say things like let's think. Okay, I'm going to say something along the lines of like rushing, right? Because we're dealing with old folks. Old folks are usually slower, right? They don't rush as much. However, they still want to be part of it, so you might say something along the lines of collecting data in 2 days may not be suitable because old folks are usually slower and more forgetful. And therefore, measuring the data in only 2 days may result in collecting data in 2 days may not be suitable because old folks are usually slower and more forgetful, and therefore measuring data in 2 to 3 days will result in inaccurate results. Okay, that's it. I think that's enough. Collecting data in 2 days may not be suitable because old folks are usually slower and therefore may produce inaccurate results. Okay, I would give myself 2 marks for that. I think it's pretty decent. Explain one weakness of using a questionnaire for Java study. Okay, so again, what is a questionnaire? Can you remember? I mentioned it not too long ago. Right, a questionnaire is written questions. That's it. That's it. So let's say I come up to you as I'm not going to interview you. I'm just going to give you this piece of paper. When you're done, please pass it back to me. Right, so that's a questionnaire. Questionnaire is written questions. Why is it a weakness? Right, look back at your notes in research methodology. A weakness because, right, a weakness of questionnaires is that they do not capture qualitative data. Okay, what else? Okay, no, I think there's an easier answer that we can probably use. Let me think for a minute. Okay, since we're talking about old age and people are forgetful and they may not remember, you could say that let me think. People a weakness would be that old folks may not be able to answer questionnaire due to forgetfulness. Okay, so it's a 3-mark question. We have to have 3 distinct points. One weakness of using a questionnaire for Jabril study in particular is the weakness could be that old folks may not be able to answer questionnaire due to forgetfulness, or perhaps you could say maybe they're too ashamed to say how little they know or how little they chat, so they could be rather ashamed. When the questionnaire asks things like, do you have any friends? And you say, oh, I don't have any friends. You might feel embarrassed, and so you don't want to reveal the truth, right? Or you're forgetful, you have memory loss, then you can say, therefore, the data collected by questionnaires may not be accurate. Okay, so 3 marks, let's break it down. Explain one weakness of using questionnaire in Jabril study. What's the weakness? Old folks may not be able to answer questionnaire due to forgetfulness, right? Old age. A weakness would be that old folks may not be able to answer. Oh, sorry, I just copied it. Okay, I phrase this in old age. People often have memory loss and thus may not be able to recall all their friendships. in life. Okay, a weakness would be that old folks may be forgetful, memory loss, and therefore you can't recall your friendships, can't answer a survey about friendships, therefore data collected may not be accurate. Right? So something along those lines, you get 3 marks. Some other answers you may want to consider is the thing like, people feel ashamed when talking about their social circles or loneliness and stuff like that, so they may lie, and by lying, the results become less valid. So let's try that as a test as well. So 1 mark you could say was things like old people may not comfortable answering questions about their social circle, right? They may feel ashamed to reveal they have only so few friends, right? Something like that. And then the 3rd mark would be therefore they may answer in a socially desirable manner, hence reducing validity. Okay, so I explain. Old people may not be comfortable answering questions about their social circle. They may feel ashamed to reveal they have only so few friends. Therefore, they will answer in a socially desirable manner, hence reducing validity. So again, 3 marks here. You can see, as long as you have 3 distinct points that make sense, you should be well on your way to getting good marks for the exam. Okay, it's the last. Is the last question? Yeah, last question. As before I sleep. Okay, last 2 questions. Nuan wants to test the idea that the way words are presented affects recall. Okay, so you present words, it affects the way you recall them. She predicts that people recall more words from a list they hear, right, like Andrade, versus a list that they see. So if you hear someone saying apple, ball, cat, dog, versus you write it on paper and give it to a participant, right? Which one can you recall better? So that's an interesting question to ask. I'm not sure. I used to take part in memory competitions a long time ago. Describe how one could conduct a laboratory experiment to test the idea that words are that the way words are presented affects recall. Okay, so first of all, we have to pay attention to what details we have from the study. Firstly, we know the name doesn't matter so much. We have to do a laboratory experiment, right? Which is the easiest of all, right? Laboratory experiment is pretty standard, and there's a certain way the words are being presented to. So the way the words are presented is the IV. Recall is the DV, and the IV has 2 levels, which is either they hear it or they see a list. So just like that, straight away you can start breaking out the study. Now, when it comes to design questions, I have a document, right, that's really easy to use. Ta-da! Always ask yourself, oops, sorry. Where is it? Yep. Okay. What? Goodness me, why does that keep happening? What? Where did my stuff go? Okay, there we go. My goodness, I don't know why, it's just my bad day. What, who, how, where, data, ethics. Okay, this is what I want to see. Alright, for your design question, follow this format. What, who, how, where, data, ethics. Okay, so first the what, research method, IV, DV, and operation definition. What are we studying? So we need to answer that. In fact, you can even put it in like, heading and stuff like that. Don't do it in point form, but you can use things like 1, 2, 3 and stuff like that to space out your answer clearer. Right, so firstly, I would like to talk about the what. Okay, what do I want to talk about? Okay, that's my little attempt at a joke. Bold that. All right, so the what is this study is a laboratory experiment. Okay, so we've covered the type of experiment. Okay, what do we need? Research method. Okay, IV, DV, operational definition. Right. So, by the way, research method also includes between subjects and within subjects. So, if we're having 2 groups of people, one can hear and one can see, then it should be what? Is it between or within? It should be between, right? Because between means 2 different groups. Okay. The study will be using a between subjects design, so that participants are kept so that each participant only experiences one level of the IV. Okay, start with that. The study of using between subjects design so that each participant only experiences one level of the IV. This study is a laboratory experiment. Okay, that's fine. Now we have to figure out what the IVs and the DVs are. Okay, so look at my format. What is the IV? What is the DV? What is the operational definition? So the IV in this study is, what is it? It is presentation of words. Okay, there are two levels. Is words heard via audio and words seen on a piece of paper. Audio and audio recording. Okay, so it's good to be specific when you want to operationally define IV and DV. So there's IV, presentation of words is the IV. There are two levels, words heard via audio recording and words seen on a piece of paper. Right, that's the IV. What about the DV? So let's talk about the DV. The DV is recall, right? It's memory recall. Memory recall is operationally defined as how many correct answers a person gives. How many words they recognize correctly when tested. Right? So again, we're testing recall, right? About words that you see or words that you hear, right? So DV would be memory recall. How many words do you recognize when you were tested? Ta-da! That basically will be your DV. Okay? Now, we've explained the what. Now we go to the who, right? So the what is the backbone of the study, all that nice information. Now we want to figure out the who. So, let me just copy this. Who. So we want to figure out who our participants are. Now this is where students get a bit nervous. They're like, what can I do? Who can I study? Just choose something simple. If it's not written here who you have to study, then you could always just take it from anywhere, right? So for example, the study will sample university students. All right. So you've identified who your sample is. What sampling can we use? Convenience sampling will be used by recruiting a class of students. Okay, that's who the sample will be, how it's being done, sample and sampling technique. You can always add something like above the age of 18 years. Right, just to be specific if you want to. Okay, that's the who. Now we go to the how procedure. This one takes the most time to type. So when it comes to procedure, we're basically asking ourselves this question. What are the steps that are involved in order to make this experiment succeed? Right? So firstly, let's try and think about it, right? So firstly, recruit many students by sampling from a class available. Okay. Invite half the students to a room where they will listen to a recording reading out a list of 50 random words. Right? The other half, something I forgot to add is how many students you want to sample. Let's just say 100 university students. Okay, 50. Invite 25. Let me rephrase this. Randomly allocate 25 students to one condition. They will be brought to an empty room and listen to an audio recording reading out a list of 50 objects. Okay, so that's one. The other 25 students will be brought into an empty room as well and be given a physical list of 50 objects. After, let's see, according to a 5-minute audio recording, sorry, I'm being a bit quiet. I am trying very hard not to fall asleep because I'm extremely tired. So, essentially, what we want to do is figure out the backbone of the study, who's going to be involved, how can we do the study. Okay. First, we recruit students by sampling from a class available. Let's put 50 university students. Randomly allocate 25 students to one condition. They'll be brought to an empty room, listen to a 5-minute audio recording, reading out a list of 50 objects. Okay. The other 25 students will be brought into an empty room as well and reading out a list of 50 objects required to memorize them in 5 minutes. Okay. After each group is done with their task in 5 minutes, then a memory recall test is administered. After the test, the results are calculated and the mean for each group is tabulated and compared. A bar graph can be used to compare the results of both conditions. Audio recording versus paper. Okay, so can you follow along? Okay, you can just add one more here. Informed consent will be given. Something along those lines lah. Okay, this is just an example. Don't have to follow exactly. So you're going to recruit students and giving them informed consent, randomly allocate 25 to one condition and 25 to another condition. After they're done, give them a memory recall test. After the test, calculate and get the mean. Use a bar graph to calculate. Actually, this can come later. Right? So that is the whole procedure of the event. Right? You want it in a way that people just reading it can repeat it. Where is the location? Right? So you can add where. Right? So where are we doing the study? Right? This study will take place inside a university classroom. Right? Something like that. Okay, pretty straightforward. What else? Data. What kind of data is collected? Okay, so let's go down here. Oops, can't do that. Oh, where's my thing? Copy, paste. Okay, I can't seem to do it. No, never mind, it's alright. Data. So this is just my personal style. I like to do it like this, right? You don't have to follow exactly. So this is the way I like to do it. Okay, so in terms of data, what can we say? Data collected is numerical, hence objective. Okay, the data collected is numerical and hence objective. What are we collecting? Basically, how many words they get correct, right? So how many words participants recalled accurately. Okay, because it is, sorry, we don't need to, okay, so I'm making a mistake. You don't need to explain the strengths and the weaknesses of the design here. You just want to tell people what you're doing and how you're doing it. You don't need to explain beyond that. So data collected is numerical. How many words participants recalled accurately in the test? Okay, I think that's good enough. Okay, add in the memory recall test. Okay, so again, don't need to explain good, bad, strength, weaknesses. That. What else do we say? Data analysis and charts. So this is where I said we can add the bar graph, right? So the mean of each group will be calculated and compared to each other using a bar graph. Okay, done. So you've got your data there. Last but not the least, ethics. All right. So what are ethical measures that you will take in order to protect your participants? Ethics. Okay. So what will I say? Ethics might be something along the lines of participants will all be given informed consent before the study. What else can we say? That's the main one, right? If you're doing a study about audio and stuff like that, let me think. Well, if you have deception, then you have to make sure you remove the deception by doing debriefing, right? So depending on how you structure your answer, some people want to have deception, some people don't, right? But let me think. Participants will be given informed consent before the study. Yeah, that's it. You could also say something like, should a participant feel uncomfortable during the memory recall, they will have the right to leave the experiment at any time without any consequences. Something like that lah. Okay. This is just again an example. Informed consent is usually the number one. If you have deception, make sure you have debriefing, and make sure you just don't do anything to torture people. Should the participant feel uncomfortable during memory call, they will have the right to leave the experiment anytime without any consequences. Okay, so we've covered basically the entire design of a study, right? In essence, if you go up again here, so what is it? Laboratory, IVs, DVs, identify them, define them. Who are we sampling? How many? What sampling method are we using? How are we conducting the experiment? The procedure to run the experiment doesn't have to be super detailed, but should have enough detail so that it's clear what you're doing. Where is it going to take place? What kind of data are we dealing with? How will we calculate the data? And last but not the least, what measures are we taking to ensure that our study is ethical, right? So it's long, but you want 10 marks, you got to make sure you have enough depth, right? So I always emphasize to my students, use a format like this. You can actually put headers like this in your study. It's fine. Don't write everything in point form, however, write in sentences, but you can use headers and titles like this to make your answer easier to read. Oh, there you are. Okay, identify one practical weakness or limitation with the procedure you have described in your answer in part A. Suggest how your study might be done differently to overcome the problem. Do not refer to ethics or sampling in your answer. Always be careful to read this. Don't forget to read this. This is very important. Cannot talk about ethics, cannot talk about sampling. What does that leave me with? So, I've got the what, I cannot talk about sampling, so no who. Cannot talk about ethics. Cannot talk about this. So I can talk about data. I can talk about where. Not where is usually not so popular. You can talk about what the study is about, right? So a lot of things I can talk about, but I must talk about it in terms of a weakness. Okay, in terms of a weakness. So let's choose something here. Let's see. Oh, okay. So I could talk about the audio recording. Okay, no, let's not talk about audio recording. Let's talk about another weakness. What can we use here? Sampling is always the easiest one. Ethics is also really easy. I'm trying to think of an easier answer that I could give. Let me think. Okay, so let's maybe look at. Okay. Firstly, to identify what is a weakness in the study. Let's think of one. Okay, so one weakness is that this study uses a between subjects design, which has a weakness that there may be participant variables which affect the results of the study. Okay, so firstly, identify what the weakness is. Okay. Right, so that's the weakness. 1 mark. Let's try and explain that weakness a bit better. So we're going to elaborate on this. Participant variables might include things such as some participants who have naturally good memory skills and may confound the results depending whichever condition they are placed into. Right? So some people naturally have better memory skills than others. But if you have someone who has very good memory skills, they will affect your results. Because maybe let's say, for example, that reading is better than hearing. Right? Let's just assume that's true. Reading the words helps you memorize better than hearing. But if you have someone who is a fantastic memory expert and he's in the hearing group, it will seem as if the hearing group is doing better, right? So that can confound your results. So that's one, study weakness identified. How is it a weakness in your study? Now we have to figure out how to solve this problem. This problem can be resolved by using a within subjects design, whereby the same participant listens to the audio and what? Within subjects means they go through both levels, listen to audio and reads a list of words. The words should be different for the audio and the written list. Okay, now what's the strength of this, right? This is the solution. The problem is between subjects design. Why? Participant variables participant variables can confound results. Solution is to use a within subjects design. We have to explain why, how does that solve the problem, right? Within, because the same participant is used for both levels of the IV, therefore participant variables are reduced and the study is more, right? So when you use the same person in condition A and then the same person in condition B, it reduces participant variables because you have less people. That's number one, right? The same person is here, the same person is here. If I recruit two different people, X and Y, right? Two different people. If I have two different individuals, I get twice as much participant variables. But if I only have one individual A, and then this guy A also goes into the second condition A, I only have one participant variable in a sense lah. It's the same guy, right? If I had more people, there's more participant variables. So by having the same participant go for both levels, the participant variables are reduced and the study becomes more valid. Okay, so that's one way you can answer. And 4 marks, right? Identify the weakness, why is it a problem? Identify the solution, how is it a solution? Right? So that's one of the things that you can do in order to answer this question. Right? Yeah, just make sure you read all the answers correctly. So again, some pointers and some tips. Usually 1 mark is equal to 1 minute of time. That's just a general guide. It's not a strict guide, just a general guide. When you see a 2 mark question, always give point plus link or point plus some extra detail. Okay? Always read the question and look at how many marks are involved. Right? When you know that, when you know what the question is asking and how many marks are involved, you can structure your answer better. Right? Always ask yourself, does the question say something like this study? Right? If it does, pay attention to those words. Ask yourself, which study is it talking about? Not just any study. Or sometimes it can come from any study. It depends on how the question is phrased. Right? So always be very attentive to those kind of questions. What else can I advise you? Okay, having a structure is good. So you have design questions like this. Structure your design. What, who, how, where, data, ethics. This is how I do my answers. This is how I tell my students to do my answers as well. To do their answers as well, right? Again, a lot of paper 2 is about research methodology and research methods. So you need to revise this. I don't have a video about it now. Just read your textbook, right? Whatever you learned in research methodology, what kinds of experiments are there, what kinds of observations, what are the strengths and weaknesses of your experiments, your designs, your observations, your sampling techniques. It's a lot of just data, information, right? You just have to memorize and use your common sense to figure out from there. Okay? So I hope this has been helpful. I wish you all the best for your exam papers, which I know are coming up in this month, October. Hopefully you have enough time to prepare for it. Okay, all the best and God bless you all.